Hello and welcome to Feed the Seed to Succeed, where we have positive conversations to uplift the community. I am Fungus.
And I'm T Stu, what it do? Today, we are honored to have Lenore Anderson joining us. Lenore is a force for change in criminal justice and public safety landscape. As a co-founder and president of Alliance for Safety and Justice and the founder of Californians for Safety and Justice, Lenore has dedicated her career to reforming systems that impact millions of lives. She's not just an advocate, she's a pioneer. Lenore was the campaign chair and co-author of California's Safe Neighborhoods and School Act, Prop 47, a groundbreaking initiative that reclassifies sections of the penal code to reduce incarceration and redirect state funds to vital community services like mental health, drug treatment, trauma recovery centers, and education. This initiative has led to reallocation over $500 million, billion with a B, from state prisons to community programs. Beyond California, Lenore has worked pivotal reforms nationwide, such as Amendment 4, which restored the rights of people with old records, voting rights for people with old records, with a rich background in policy making and a heart of justice. Lenore works to transform the lives of countless individuals in the community. She is also an accomplished author with her latest book, In Their Names, The Untold Stories of Victim Rights, Mass Incarceration, and Future of Public Safety. Challenge us to rethink how we approach justice in America. So sit back and tune in and get ready for an inspiring conversation with one of the most influential voices in criminal justice reform, Lenore Anderson. This is Feed the Seed on 88.3 FM, and where we nurture and cultivate ideas that grow into change. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you.
Yes. So I read all this stuff about who you are, but who is Lenore Anderson?
Well, let's see. Military brat, born in Texas, military brat, moved all over the country, finished high school in California, and I didn't plan on going to college, Terrence. I wanted to be a drummer in a punk rock band. That's what I wanted to do. And I got Graves' disease, which is just an illness where I needed health insurance. And so my dad said, hey, if you go to college, junior college, you'll be covered under my health insurance plan. So that was his way of getting me on a different track. And it worked. So went to college, ended up in law school, and those experiences, were foundational for me. When I was in college, I started doing activism around police brutality, and met many people, but for race and class, I would have been pulled into the justice system just the same. I was a troublemaker as a teenager. I don't think I had enough of a consciousness at that time to really understand the privilege of not getting incarcerated, the privilege of being given a second chance. And when I was in college and law school, I met so many young people and young adults who had made some of the same mistakes I had made, but suffered a lifetime of consequences as a result, simply because we're talking about young people of color in California. And when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, that was what was going on in California. We used to call it the war on youth. There was an aggressive effort on the part of California's criminal justice system to mass incarcerate, and the target were young people of color. So I dedicated my life to racial justice as a result of those awakenings, and I've been building organizations like Alliance for Safety and Justice ever since.
Wow. I think Elliot was going to ask you about the whole drummer thing,
Oh no, since I was gonna ask later, but yeah, what band were you in? I noticed some bios and stuff mentioned you were a drummer and you said it yourself.
So my high school garage band was called Oblivion. And we didn't go very far. I think that some of the people I played music with back then did go on to do a lot of things in music, but I did not play very much after high school, but it was called Oblivion, and we mostly played in my garage and annoyed neighbors.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
what was your inspiration in doing your book? I mean, I know you're passionate with you know, a lot of social justice, justice reform. Tell me more about the book.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to write in their names because I genuinely feel like there is an untold story, right? We are living in a time where two things are happening. One is, you know, I think there is a lot more consciousness around racism in the American criminal justice system. There's a lot more consciousness among voters around the fact that we don't want to, you know, an approach to public safety that's focused on, you know, mass imprisonment. And that's good that we have that consciousness. But on the same time, we have a resurgence of tough on crime, right? We're living in a time where there's a lot more fear. There's a lot more discussion around the need to increase arrests and get tougher. And in both of those conversations is a flaw, right? In both of those conversations, there's a missing story. In the story around over-incarceration, one of the things that I think is missing from that story is it's not just that incarceration increases are bad or racialized. It's also that the lack of safety, there's a disparity in who has access to safety in the first place. Right. And so I think that when we only talk about incarceration, we're missing racial disparities in access to safety as a foundational issue. I think the second thing is the problem with the tough on crime story is it assumes that you can only have so much decarceration before you start to really affect safety, and that victims are hurt when you reduce incarceration. So I wanted to challenge both. You know, I don't think that either narrative is the full picture. I wanted to say, listen, you know, there's an untold reality, which is that we have never had a criminal justice system that cared all that much about victims. Never. And if you start with that premise, if you start with this idea that like, hey, look, our justice system has never protected the vast majority of people from harm, why are we building it up as a pathway to safety when it has never been able to do that? So I really wanted to elevate that and contribute it to the conversation around crime policy.
Man, that's awesome. You know, something that I took from your book was that your book mentioned that there's over 2 million people in the United States working for the justice system, a workforce comparable to the entire agriculture sector. What do you think the implications of having such a large proportion of a workforce tied to criminal justice system, and how does this influence public policy and reform efforts?
Yeah, we experience the outcomes of that reality a lot of the time in our work at Alliance for Safety and Justice. You know, there's the graph that shows how incarceration increased significantly across the U.S. from the mid 1980s to the 2010s. Well, that's a graph of people incarcerated. You could see a similar graph that is people employed, people working for criminal justice bureaucracies. What happens when you significantly increase government bureaucracies like this? Well, a couple different things happen. One is they have lobbyists, they have associations, employee associations, they have political clout, local political clout, statewide political clout, federal political clout. So in the building out of these huge institutions, whether it's sheriff's agencies, prosecutors' offices, corrections agencies, state prison systems, parole systems, all of those big agencies have a huge number of employees, and they become a political force. They become a stakeholder, right? So most mayors across the country, when they're faced with a public safety problem, who are they going to call? They're going to call the stakeholders that they conceive of, which are local law enforcement at the state level as well. These associations and these stakeholder groups represent the criminal justice system. They don't represent people who are suffering from a lack of safety. They do not represent the interests of people who've been harmed by extreme incarceration. And so a lot of what we are trying to do at Alliance for Safety and Justice is rebalance that, is rebalance the stakeholder disparity that exists, that was created when these huge agencies became even bigger.
Man, that is really righteous. And you know, I found it really interesting because one time after Survivor Speak, right, I was coming home on the airplane, and I still have my Survivor Speak T-shirt on. And when I was approached, somebody who said, you know, I look different from the stereotypical image of a survivor. You know, like this was said to me, you know, and I was telling them, like, you know, but I am a survivor, you know, and you know, it made sense once they heard the voice. But like, how is Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice different from the traditional victims of crime group?
Yeah. Well, first, Terrence, it's so disturbing to hear that someone would walk up to you and say that. It's so profound, the misinformation that people have about who's hurt by crime and violence. When you look at the statistics of who is most likely to become a victim of crime, and especially who's most likely to be repeatedly hurt by crime and violence, it is not equal. Anyone can become a victim, but the concentrated impact of crime and violence is not equal in this country. And the reality is that's because we have never had a criminal justice system that protected everyone the same. And so when you have a criminal justice system that does not protect everyone the same, you're increasing the vulnerability for low-income communities, communities of color. Men of color in particular are most likely to be victims of crime more than any other demographic in the United States. Think about how much that is different than the story we're told about who victims are by the media and in movies and in popular culture. Okay, there's this public perception in the mainstream universe that is, you know, essentially white women, right? Middle class, right? Like that's the perception that is presented as who's most vulnerable, right? It's absolutely not true. Now, of course, white women become victims of crime. All demographic groups become victims of crime. That's not at issue. What's at issue is who has access to safety from public systems, who gets protected, which victims do police respond to the fastest, which victims get the most access to victim compensation, which victims get the most opportunity to have their voices heard in court. That is not experienced equally. There's huge racial disparities in which victims are treated like victims and which victims are disregarded. You know, I have an entire section in the book, right, that's focused on disregarded victims. And I go through the whole history, the whole sort of racial bias that's been in our criminal justice system that has meant that victims of color, LGBTQ victims, victims with disabilities, victims who speak English as a second language, low-income victims, victims of color. Those are the victims that the justice system chronically ignores, chronically disregards at the expense of their safety, right? Disregarding that many different demographic groups of victims means they are more vulnerable to become a victim again and not get help. Okay, meanwhile, a much smaller percentage of people who are hurt actually get to sit in court and have their day in court, get treated like they need help, get treated like they deserve trauma recovery and they deserve you know, the access to compensation. So a lot of what we're doing at Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, Terrence, you talked about our Survivor Speak events that we hold all across the country on the steps of capitals where we bring diverse victims together. A lot of what we're doing with Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice is we're trying to say, These are survivors who deserve dignity and deserve safety. And we're going to fight for that right alongside fighting for the rights of people who are formerly incarcerated.
Man, show you right. Show you right. And we go fight. And I just say that because some things that you mentioned, and it's a part of a lot of the work that we do, like with the trauma recovery centers, right? And is I lost my uncle. He was murdered when I was like 12 years old. And and like, that shifted my whole world. Even not just me, my whole family, but like me as a child, like my uncle, I was raised by my grandma, so that's my uncle. My grandma raised him too. So we grew up as like brothers, I seen him every day. I seen him the day that he was murdered. And like unaddressed trauma, even for me as a kid, I grew up for a while I couldn't even study, which got me in trouble because I wasn't doing my schoolwork. I wasn't playful no more. Like, it just changed my whole aura for some years, And like unaddressed trauma, like it shifted. And I believe like, it was some of the cause of reason, because like within that in the school to prison pipeline working together, I started to like being recommended to DARE programs, which got me in contact with the police, which eventually started me getting searched and started to put me in a certain trajectory, And I just always think like, and it's just, I just wanted to get your view is that, that it's often overlooked that many individuals who have been arrested themselves have been victims of multiple acts of violence before becoming involved in the criminal justice system. How does recognizing this system of victimization change our approach to justice and reform? And what policies or programs do we believe is most effective in breaking these cycles?
Well, first, Terrence, let me just say I'm so sorry for your loss, and thank you so much for sharing that. What you described is devastating and common, right? This idea that young people suffer significant loss, whether it's losing loved ones by way of violence, as you did, or whether it's being a direct victim of violence. And when young people do not get help to recover, when our school systems don't recognize that kids are experiencing unaddressed trauma, when our public health systems don't recognize that kids are experiencing unaddressed trauma, what you described is what often happens next, right? Which is then all of a sudden they're in contact with the criminal justice system, right? All of these other public agencies who are serving children and serving families are not recognizing when folks need support to recover from significant experiences, significant traumatic experiences. And so, what you described is what we have seen over and over again in our work together, right? Which is that 90% of the people who are entering the criminal justice system, 90% have been victims of crime before. 90%. Right? What happened when they experienced victimization earlier in their life? Did they get access to therapy? Did they get access to emergency assistance, shelter if needed, whatever the kinds of supports are that families need, mental health support, all of those things. If you don't get those, that is right, that providing trauma recovery services is violence prevention, right? It is criminal justice system involvement prevention, right? So, if 90% of the people going into our criminal justice system have been hurt before and didn't get access to help or support, it shouldn't be surprising to us that they end up in our criminal justice system. I talk in the book about the real very popular saying that we have in our violence prevention movement, right? Which is hurt people hurt people. And the parallel to that, which is that healed people heal people, right? So we can absolutely invest in healing services as a centerpiece for public safety. Okay, we can invest in things like trauma recovery services, which are one-stop shops where you can get emergency assistance combined with long-term therapeutic help, regardless of whether or not there's a prosecution in the case, regardless of whether or not there's the legal system is taking action, you can still get that help. There's reentry programs, right? That peer navigators, right? Peer reentry navigators helping people coming out of the justice system who are vulnerable to becoming victims get stabilized with housing and employment. There's crisis assistance responders, right? Which are peer mental health advocates who, in lieu of law enforcement first responses, can engage with people in psychiatric crisis and get them on a path to stability. Those are healing services, right? We need to have in this country not just a right to be heard in court if there's a criminal court matter, right? We deserve a right to heal. And a right to heal is access to healing services. That's what would stop the cycle of crime.
Man, you got to give a minute for that to sink in, like, what I mean? Safety for all. Okay, I know we're going to be wrapping up in a minute, but I wanted to ask this. As a leader in criminal justice reform, well, I really want to say this. I've been rocking with with Alliance for Safety and Just Californians for Safety and Justice for since 2014 with advocating for Prop 47, and I think it's always you can't have Lenore and not mention Robert Rooks. I met Robert Rooks in 2014 when he did an informational in Riverside. Me and Fungus did homeless workshops for years, and he did it right across the street from where we did our workshops for years. And 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 that's where I heard of you for the first time. And when I learned about Prop 47, the reallocation, the 3 R's, I learned reallocation, reduce, and then the other thing was retroactive. And I heard retroactive. That was the first time I ever heard the word retroactive before in my life, was through Prop 47, And I was a young leader then. I have advocated for a year, but the criminal justice landscapes changed so much with Prop 47, with introducing Prop 47 and the implementation of it. It changed drastically, And so from a budding leader, to starting to get way more involved in voter work, policy change, everything, I just wanted to ask this as a leader in criminal justice reform, what advice would you give young advocates who are just beginning their journey in the field, and how can they make meaningful difference in their community?
Such a great question. And Terrence, it's just been an honor to do this work with you for over a decade. There's not a lot of people who stick with it. And so I think that'd be my first piece of advice, is what I see you doing, and what I see so many folks on our team doing, which is stick with it. One of the first protests I ever went to was a protest against the 3 strikes and you're out ballot initiative in 1994. And this ballot initiative was extremely popular. Okay. And we got our signs and our bullhorns and we marched and protested against it with little likelihood of having an impact on that election cycle, right? That was something that passed at 70% yes, right? The enactment of this atrocious law in California called 3 strikes and you're out. And I remember we used to have goals back then that were not transform the entire system. Our goals were get 1 or 2 public officials to stand on our side, get 1 or 2 news stories that tell the sympathetic story of how harsh these laws are going to be, right? That was back then, right? 1994, you fast forward to 2024, right? It's popular understanding and acceptance that these extreme incarceration policies from the 80s and 90s hurt communities, especially communities of color, hurt our state budget, and ultimately hurt public safety. But I would have never predicted that, right? All the way back in 94, I would have never predicted the success of this movement and how much it has grown. And so I really want to encourage listeners who are interested in being a part of the movement for safety and justice to take the long view and to stick with it. And in part of taking the long view, it also means collaboration matters, humility matters, and the ability to just say, you know what, I don't know whether or not we're going to be able to win this or solve this or change this, but I know it matters to stand up. One of the things that's so cool to me is, Terrence, you were talking about like learning about Prop 47 and then getting involved, and now you're a leader, right? So whether you win or lose on a policy isn't what matters. Whether you build leaders for a lifetime is what matters. Are we building leaders for the future, right? Because we could all go home today and everything that we've won would be repealed, right? So we have to have the ability to leave people behind who have the skills and capacities to advocate for the next generation and the generation after that. This is long-term, permanent organizing. That's what we're building. And that's what transformation really requires.
Oh man, thank you so much. And I'm gonna pass it to Fungus to wrap us up. But I wanted to say this, I listed a long list of all the accomplishments that you have done and like you was a part of. But for me, Prop 47 was a game changer in my life as far as being an advocate, really my first job, also like, Prop 57 the same, and then like, the whole Second Chance Initiative and in the report we wrote, which was repairing the road to redemption. And from repairing the road to redemption, we launched Time Done, and then like we passed AB 1076, which created automatic records clearances, and then we took it a little bit further, and now we passed SB 731, which created a new way to petition the courts for people with past convictions that they didn't have the same opportunity. We created a new whole matrix of record clearance, and I'm like applying for I'm applying for SB 731 as we speak, and my record has been a menace in my life. Everybody knows I talk about it, it just don't affect me, it affects my whole family and so forth and so on, living and jobs and, like trying to adopt my loved ones and all this stuff is heartaches that I have faced because of my record. And now I have a glimmer of hope getting my record removed, and it talked about like, the millions of people that you helped, through policy and everything. And I just wanted to take this time out to thank you. Like wholeheartedly, like, the movements that you have put together has impacted my life tremendously, and I just really that's why I prepped for this call and everything, but I wanted to take this time out to, acknowledge, that, and let you know that you are appreciated in many spaces, but this space right here, and I finally got a hold of you to tell you, and I'm telling you on the radio, and this message going to space, and it don't never leave, so I appreciate you wholeheartedly, and Fungus.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. This has been the Feed the Seed to Succeed radio program, where we have positive conversations to uplift the community. And today we were joined by Lenore Anderson, co-founder and president of Alliance for Safety and Justice and founder of Californians for Safety and Justice. She is an attorney with extensive experience working to reform criminal justice and public safety systems. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day. And any last words, Lenore?
It just mutual appreciation right back at you, Terrence. You know, I think, you know, I'm asked like, oh, you know, often like, oh, wow, you know, this work that y'all started, that Robert and I started, it's now big, and how does that feel? And I'm like, you know, if there's one thing I know is that it's always teamwork. It's always teamwork. And you know, whoever initiates it matters a lot less than who sticks around for the partnership long term. And so it's just an honor to be partnered with you on this work, Terrence. Appreciate you both so much, and thank you for having me on here.
Thank you.
Thank you.